Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, and what she has been saying here about the situation in Gaza and the Israeli response to the mass casualty, really mass murder terror attack by Hamas that happened last week. And I think that this was look, AOC is not somebody that I would go to for advice on, well, anything, but certainly on national security, military affairs, intelligence matters, intelligence in the broadest sense, we could say here with AOC, but specifically like CIA, Mossad intelligence stuff too. And here she is trying to explain to CNN. And it was interesting, Clay, because CNN's Abby Phillip wasn't just going along with this one. At CNN, they do, they're a mainstream, if you will, Democrat network. And so they don't put a lot of big Hamas fans on the air over at CNN. And so there's a little bit of a pushback here. Let's start with this one. Here's AOC trying to explain why now, after the mass casualty terror attack, with Hamas having suffered very little reprisal or response, AOC wants a ceasefire. Play 26.
I think what's important to note about a ceasefire is that it's not one-sided. Hamas has been sending thousands of rockets into Israel as well. And what is important is for us to identify our goal in terms of what safety means, in terms of what defense means.
But
and
if I may, Congresswoman, I think the position from Israel's perspective is that there was already an attack. Mm-hmm. And Hamas already committed an attack. Mm-hmm. After that happened, do you really believe that they should not respond to that?
I think what is important in terms of response is Israel does have a right to self-defense. I think what we need to take a look at in this situation is if collective punishment qualifies as defense.
Clay, it strikes me it's babble. It's nonsense. It's gibberish meant to avoid offending the far left constituents who are the biggest supporters of AOC, and many of whom are supporters at some level of Hamas.
Can we go back to the open there? I don't know if my mic was on, if you heard me laughing. Did you hear her, Buck, explain what a ceasefire is? as if people are like, I mean, are there people who think that the ceasefire actually means you fight? Can we play that first sentence again? I mean, this woman is an imbecile, but just listen to this as she explains what's important to know what a ceasefire actually means. Listen.
I think what's important to note about a ceasefire is that it's not one-sided. Hamas has been sending thousands of rockets into Israel as well. And what is important is for us to identify our goal in terms of what safety means.
So it's not one-sided. A ceasefire that was one-sided would really not be a ceasefire at all, right? So,
what she's trying to say here is there'd be some benefit to Israel as well because the rockets would stop. But Israel has the Iron Dome and is well prepared to deal with those rockets. The Israelis also want to deal with the Viper's Nest that is Hamas leadership, and they cannot allow this to go. I mean, what nation state, what country in the history of the world would suffer an attack like this and then be like, hey, we're not going to do anything. Let's just talk.
No,
it's crazy. I mean, but this is a constant theme. What the left does is they create a world where there are no standards to which you can hold Hamas. There are no standards, there's no blame that can be cast on the Palestinians because, in fact, everything that the Palestinians and or Hamas does wrong is the fault of the Israelis. And then they also simultaneously will say that Israel must be held to standards that no other country is held to, that no other nation state is held to for, perfection in its military response when it comes to lack of civilian casualties or, willingness to take threats to its core national security that no other country would accept.
Well, Buck, we played that Mehdi Hassan clip where he blamed conservative talk radio for the guy murdering someone. AOC is trying to argue the exact opposite, right? And this is what the left is trying to argue. They regularly argue that individual actors, whether it's Kyle Rittenhouse, whether it's anybody who committed a violation on January 6th of the law, that they are all directly representative for the larger group of which they are a small part, right? That there is a collective guilt, that everybody is responsible for January 6th. If you're a Trump supporter, you're responsible for January 6th. If you're a conservative talk radio host or a conservative talk radio listener, you're responsible for this murder that just happened. Meanwhile, anyone that Hamas is collectively not responsible for anything, right? That's the first argument, is they're just responding to Israel's provocations, to Israel's existence, to Israel's mass casualty events that they've caused. But then they simultaneously will say, oh, well, Hamas, that you can't connect them to Gaza because not every member of Hamas is also supported by every resident of Gaza. And so you come back to, and you want collective guilt on what is comparatively a small incident, like, hey, this one conservative talk radio listener maybe committed a murder, and therefore this is caused by listening to conservative talk radio. But there is no responsibility for anyone in Palestine for what Hamas did at all. So it's a refusal. Ultimately, what the left fails at, Buck, is individual responsibility. They can't ever accept that you are the captain of your own ship, that you are, to steal from Seinfeld, the master of your domain, that you are responsible for the individual life choices that you make. All of it is collective if you fail, and if your enemies fail, it's collective, but there's never any individual responsibility. That's really what it kind of boils down to.
She continues with her analysis here, which I think people should hear. Play it.
For Israel to deal with Hamas, which is a force that is actually detrimental to Palestinians.
Absolutely.
How else are they supposed to address a violent, militant, some say terrorist group, other than to go in there and take them on directly?
Well, you know, when we talk about going in there, I think we should also keep in mind President Biden's statements as well about what the implications of a potential ground invasion would be. This is an inherently complex situation. I do believe that Hamas needs to be dealt with.
But how, I think, is what I'm trying to understand.
And I think what we're trying to figure out right now is that this present situation of collective punishment and indiscriminate attack is one approach, but we are seeing the issues and the complications with that approach now.
I mean, this notion of collective punishment, there's, first of all, there are all these different groups in this country that there's the divest Israel movement, and there's, the UN passes all these condemnations, UN resolutions that condemn Israel. They ignore North Korea, and they ignore, what's going on in the Sudan and places like that.
And China.
But, China, yeah. But they're always condemning Israel, as you know. Beyond that, though, when first of all, she's just saying things like this is complicated. We know it's complicated. No one's saying that there aren't complexities involved here. It's a very serious and very tragic situation, and that's apparent to all. But I think that the CNN anchor, Abby Phillips, makes the very good and essential point, which is these are terrorists who want to murder Israelis. They just showed us this. What do you want to have happen here? It reminds me a little bit of the movement on the left when there's somebody who's running around wants to stab everybody, and they're like, send a social worker. It's like sometimes a social worker is not going to get it done. In fact, sometimes it's immoral to respond to force with something other than force because you have people that you are obligated to protect. The Israeli nation has an obligation to Israelis and to Jews and to everybody who lives in the state of Israel to deal with this threat, right? I mean, if someone, during a home invasion, someone breaks into your home, you've got a gun, they've got a gun, that's not the time to say, hey, I think it's time for us to have a ceasefire. They're in your home. They're a threat to you.
Well, even crazier, once they shoot you, you don't get to argue that then we should have a ceasefire, right? That is effectively what's going on.